وينشر الهدي إيمانا وموعظة فبالجهالة قد خابت مساعينا غابت مناقبنا واسود حاضرنا غابت مناقبنا واسود حاضرنا وأوشك اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of the Sulaiman Ravat Show. You may have seen the promo, you may have read on social media that today we are discussing ISIS. Yes, in many ways it has become a buzzword in recent months, not only here in South Africa, but globally. Many people are trying to understand the phenomena. Many people are trying to understand where they come from, what's the group all about, what are they trying to achieve. How is it that they seem to have appeal, that their message seems to be resonating with some here in South Africa and many other parts of the world? Muslims themselves are grappling, trying to understand, trying to get to the depths of the issues. And one of the consequences of the emergence of ISIS is that Muslims in many parts of the world have once again come under the microscope of suspicion. Unfairly, many would argue. And then you've got the media. At times, there's almost an obsession with the ISIS issue, apart from sensational reporting. And at times there is factual reporting as well, we must concede in that regard. Nonetheless, I don't want to take too much of your time with a lengthy introduction. We have four guests on the panel this evening who will be enlightening us on various aspects. And towards the latter part of the program, inshallah, we will be opening the lines and we will allow you to ask questions and to make comments on the issues that have been raised. In studio with me here in Johannesburg, I have Naeem Jeenah. He is a political analyst with AMAC. Naeem, Jazakumullah for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome.
Wa rahmatullah.
And also in studio with us this evening, we have Brother Ebrahim Patel. He's been on the program before. Last time we were discussing elections. This time we're discussing ISIS. You sit here tonight in your capacity as media spokesperson for the various organizations that have taken out a media statement that was released yesterday.
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
And also in our studios in Cape Town, we have Sheikh Fakhruddin Uwaisi from the Sunni Ulama Council in the Cape region. Sheikh, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Shukran.
And Maulana Ashraf Dokrat, who is a director at the Darus Salam Institute in Lodium, will be joining us in our Cape Town studios in a short while, inshallah. Ebrahim, if we can start with you first. This media statement, already it's in the public domain. Mainstream media have picked up on it. Muslim media have picked up on it. It's entitled South Africans Warned Against ISIS, issued by a number of organizations. Give us the background, give us the gist of the statement.
Muslim organizations across the religious and social spectrum and across the theological spectrum, umbrella organizations representing a whole host of representative organizations throughout the country got together out of concern that the ISIL or ISIS acronym is causing a lot of confusion and has the potential of causing a lot of harm. As a result of that, with the initiative of Naeem and various people, a meeting was called up to discuss what can we do about it as civil society, what initiative can we take to make the broader public out there aware of the dangers of following the propaganda of ISIL and ISIS, and also to take a bit of a reading between the lines attitude, to be a little more vigilant about what can take place in South Africa if we are not careful. We have a long history of very peaceful relationships with our co-religionists, and we would not like to see anything disturbing the peace in South Africa. We are South Africans, we are Muslims, and we are concerned about the negative publicity surrounding ISIL and ISIS, because at the end of the day, we get tarred with the same brush. And any organization doing sterling work in the community, be it educational, social, or welfare, with an Islamic or Islamic nomenclature in its title will be tarred with the same brush. So we need to create a distance between ourselves and what is taking place in different parts of the world. So that was the key focus in making people aware and coming out very emphatically to say that this is not what Islam stands for. The name of Islam, the deen of Islam has been hijacked. In fact, we as Muslims ought to be saying Mayday, 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 the international distress call, because the ship of Islam has been hijacked. Islam has been used to perpetrate acts which are totally contrary to the deen, and this is not what the deen stands for. So we needed to come out emphatically with a clear public statement so our fellow citizens know what is our stance, and to clear up the confusion.
Naeem, in your experience as a political analyst, was there a need for a media statement of this nature? There are those who would argue on the one hand that, look, initially it was one or two individuals that tried to go across and join ISIS, and there were reports of one or two who had reached there and then gave interviews. And then there were all the reports of about 20 plus from South Africa going as a group. So on the one hand, you could argue that that jump from 1 or 2 to 20 plus would necessitate a media statement. Others would argue that in the context of 1.5, 2 million, even 100 or 200 is a small percentage. Why make such a big noise? Why fall into this media trap, as some would call it?
I don't think it's a media trap. I think that what's happening here is that there are a large number of people within the Muslim community, both kind of organizations, etc., but just ordinary Muslims, that are concerned about what this represents for South Africa and for South African Muslims. So you're absolutely correct. I mean, 20 people, 50 people, even if it's 100 people that have gone from South Africa to join ISIS or to settle in ISIS territory, it's really a drop in the ocean compared to the size of the Muslim community. But the reason I think that there is concern within the Muslim community about this is what does it mean for the community itself? And you know, a couple of things. One is just similar to what Ebrahim said, that the image could start coming out that the Muslim community supports this kind of extremism and this kind of fanaticism. And so the message needs to be given that this is not what the community is. But secondly, I think from a more long-term perspective, it seems to me that the concern in the community is that the kind of Islamic ideas or theology that ISIS represents, that ISIS promotes through its publications, very glossy and fancy publications, that kind of ideology is one that Muslims seem to believe in South Africa, is one that we shouldn't be entertaining, that can actually have a damaging impact on how we understand Islam and on the Muslim community in this country. And I think that this concern is more a reaction to that than the fact that 20 people want to go and join ISIS.
Ebrahim, do you think that if the playing fields in the mainstream media were a little bit more even, keeping in mind that Muslims tend to sometimes get an unfair deal, and that there's a greater degree of sensational reporting and exaggerations when it comes to the Muslim community, had it not been for that we would not need to take out a statement like this? Hypothetically, if there was a Christian extremist group and 200 Christians or 300 Christians had gone across, perhaps they wouldn't have seen the need to take out statements of clarification like this, simply because there wouldn't be that fear that it would be misrepresented, exaggerated, sensationalized once mainstream media got hold of it, or once mainstream media decided to take it up.
Absolutely, I agree with that completely, because simply because it was allegedly one Muslim child from Cape Town that wanted to join ISIS, that the whole thing was blown out of proportion. And you very correctly point out that if it was a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu joining some other paramilitary force, and this has happened in our history, we are pretty well aware of that, it wouldn't have reached the level of Islamophobia that we currently see. So this falls into the mainstream media of ratcheting up and revving up the Islamophobia element, which is gaining ground worldwide. I think just to add to what has been said earlier regarding the civil society initiative, our initiative is also intended to support the international initiatives that have taken place. Just barely 3 weeks ago, there was an initiative in Abu Dhabi where senior scholars got together and issued a very similar statement to ours. Ours was, of course, very short. So the South African Muslim community is also in support of the international initiatives that are taking place. In other words, we are not standing alone, we are not standing aloof from events taking place in different parts of the Muslim world. Regarding the media component, I think it's a well-known fact that the way in which issues surrounding Muslims are being reported is not exactly fair. So mainstream media is not our friend, we know that. If a Timothy McVeigh perpetrates an act of terror, he's not called a Christian fundamentalist. The Christian faith is not called into question. His fellow co-religionists are not standing up to say what he's done we do not agree with. They're keeping quiet because it is not reported as a religious problem. As far as Muslims are concerned, any act by a Muslim or even somebody acting as a Muslim gives us negative publicity. And we're always on the back foot to say this is not who we are, this is not what the deen represents. So yes, there is a very high level of Islamophobia in mainstream media reporting.
Sheikh Fakhruddin Owaisi, let me come to you. We know that apart from the media statement that was released yesterday, the United Ulama Council of South Africa, together with others, had put together a joint Friday khutbah, or a joint Friday lecture on the ISIS issue, encouraging all those who would be delivering the Jummah khutbah across the country in various masajid to talk on this issue and to use that khutbah that had been prepared as a guide. We will unpack some of those issues in more detail as we go along. But in a nutshell, what was the message in that khutbah? Sheikh Fakhruddin, can you hear me?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, I can hear you.
Did you get the question I'm asking, Sheikh Fakhruddin, in case you didn't get it the first time? Can you give us the summary of that joint khutbah that was prepared by UQSA, which many that delivered the Jummah khutbah today across the country had utilized as a guideline to talk on ISIS?
Yes, basically the khutbah was saying that the Khilafah, first of all, there's few things it was saying. One is that the Khilafah cannot be unilaterally announced by one person. So you cannot have somebody who kind of controls a particular part of the world and then announces himself as the Khalifa of all the Muslims and then asks all Muslims in the world to migrate to him. So that is first of all not acceptable even from a Sharia point of view. That is if that was a valid state. In the case of ISIS, we don't even have a valid state. We have basically a terrorist group who are committing a lot of actions which are un-Islamic and a lot of ideas that are un-Islamic with an ideology that is really against mainstream Islam. So as South African Muslims, we are under no obligation to such an organization or such a group. The khutbah was also highlighting, the importance of, being a Muslim in South Africa itself, and how that itself, is a great blessing upon us, because we live in a country where there is freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of movement. We have so many freedoms here to serve Islam, to take the cause of Islam forward in this country. So why should anybody, want to leave this blessing that we have here and go somewhere else where we don't really even know what's going on? So from that point of view as well, as a Muslim, we have to also be careful of false calls, what the hadith calls fitan. In the last days, there will be many people calling towards many things, and we don't really know if what they are calling towards is true or is it false. So we have to be very, very careful, especially our youth. They have to be very careful not to be fooled by slogans and by Islamic names and titles and so on. So quite a few important points were raised in the khutbah, and the khutbah inshallah will be made available online for everybody, and whoever did not use it as well this Friday for whatever reasons, we encourage all the imams all over the country to read this khutbah properly and understand its contents and make sure that if it wasn't this Friday, then on another Friday as well, please make sure that you give this message across to your jama'as throughout the country. It is a khutbah that was deliberated upon by various ulama from different organizations, and it was finally brought about in the form the final form that we received. So it's not a one-man thing as well. It was, you know, the collection of the ideas and the suggestions of many different ulama from many different organizations as well.
Okay, Sheikh, Jazakumullah for that. We'll come back to you a little later in our Cape Town studio. We need to go for a quick break now. When we come back, we continue the discussion on ISIS.
أوشك اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا كاليأس أن يغشى أمانينا وأوشك اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Welcome back. We continue the discussion on ISIS. As we mentioned previously, a statement was released yesterday by a number of organizations, umbrella bodies, representing by and large the majority of Muslims in the country. It's entitled South Africans Warned Against ISIS. Initially, there were reports of one or two individuals here and there going across and joining ISIS. Now there are reports of families, of groups, 20 plus, and the discussion is perhaps even more necessary now than before. In studio here in Johannesburg, we have Naeem Jeenah, who's a political analyst at AMAC. We have Brother Ebrahim Patel. He is one of three spokespersons representing those organizations that took out this media statement yesterday. In our Cape Town studio, we have Maulana Fakhruddin Uwaisi. He's from the Sunni Ulama Council in the Cape region. And also joining us now in the Cape Town studio, just after having taken a flight from Johannesburg to Cape Town, we have Maulana Ashraf Dokrat. He's a director at Darus Salam Islamic Research Institute. Now, coming back to you, there's a big question mark in the minds of many people with regards to the history of this particular group. In the last decade and a half, we've heard a lot about Al-Qaeda. It was Al-Qaeda for many years. And then we've heard of late Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab. But ISIS, you know, what happened? They just seem to have sprung out of absolutely nowhere, and they now enjoy more prominence than perhaps all of these other groups put together currently.
Yeah, they do, but the emergence is not sudden, and it's not over the past 2 years. ISIS started off really with the invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003. Started off as one of the many groups that was fighting against the occupation. I should say one of the Sunni groups in a sense, and then became affiliated to Al-Qaeda, and was Al-Qaeda in the land of the two rivers, Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia, etc. Until around 2006 or so, when it changed its name to be called Islamic State of Iraq. Of course, it wasn't a state, it was just, it was the same as it was. Continued fighting against the Americans and the government in formation, in a sense. And still affiliated to Al-Qaeda. It was about just over 2 years ago when, in consultation with the Al-Qaeda leadership, when the Islamic State of Iraq decided then to play some role in the Syrian uprising, which became civil war, and so sent a few people into Syria, formed what became the basis of then Jabhat al-Nusra, which is one of the big fighting forces in Syria. After Jabhat al-Nusra was formed and started taking actions, etc., the leadership of Islamic State of Iraq, with Baghdadi as its head, decided that really it wasn't happy with the situation where there was an Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, but not accountable to the Islamic State of Iraq, because Jabhat al-Nusra was accountable and reported directly to the Al-Qaeda leadership. And so then sent in more people, more fighters into Syria, decided unilaterally that it was going to subsume Jabhat al-Nusra within itself, and called itself then Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, the greater Syria area. That's when the battle began between Jabhat al-Nusra and what then became ISIS. That battle led to a situation where the leader of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, in fact instructed Baghdadi to pull out of Syria and to remain in Iraq. That didn't happen. He wasn't happy with that, defied Zawahiri, and that was then when ISIS split away from Al-Qaeda. The split away from Al-Qaeda wasn't then just an organizational split. it became also an ideological split. It might have started as an organizational split, but it became an ideological split in that ISIS then went beyond the kind of ideology that Al-Qaeda has. And in one very simple explanation in terms of the positioning and their strategy, the Al-Qaeda model has been, and Al-Qaeda means base, of course, and so the Al-Qaeda model has been that people get trained by the organization, and then they go to wherever they came from. So Kashmiri Mujahideen, for example, would go to Afghanistan, train with Al-Qaeda, go back to Kashmir and do whatever they do, without necessarily even having direct accountability to Al-Qaeda. So they serve that kind of a role. And while the main kind of objective was to get, and that's how they started, was to get rid of foreign armies from Muslim lands, particularly Saudi Arabia, their kind of strategy was to attack the far enemy first, the United States in particular. The ISIS approach has been quite different. The ISIS approach is not to send people out, but in fact to bring people in. And someone commented to me yesterday that in this way it's actually very similar to Israel. Israel wants to, the ingathering of Jews, and ISIS wants the ingathering of Muslims. So they want Muslims to come in, not just to fight, but to live in their territory. The fact that they have created a territorial entity, and they're calling it a state, a dawla, is also very different from Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda had no intention to create a state in that kind of way. Yes, Al-Qaeda also spoke about Khilafah, etc., but there didn't seem to be any expectation that Osama bin Laden would be the Khalif. This would be something that would come about organically later, was their idea, while ISIS has kind of, in a sense, short-circuited that. The close group around Baghdadi has now appointed him as the Khalif. No consultation, broader consultation, etc. No one really knows who exactly is in the group that has appointed him or elected him, however they might say. And no one knows much about him either. Baghdadi himself, his background is that he was an officer in Saddam Hussein's army. As many other soldiers and officers in the army did when the Americans invaded. They took off the uniforms and joined various different fighting groups. And that's how he joined Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia. So they've now created this state. Their intention, or they've created this entity, the intention then is to protect the entity, what they're calling a state, and not to fight the far enemy, but to establish the state and fight the near enemy, all of which are Muslim countries, of course, all around. And so that's the idea. The basis of their thing is to create a state. And in that, they're creating huge disruption in the region, spanning across borders, etc., and calling on Muslims from all over the world to come in and settle there. So briefly, well, that wasn't very brief, but I'm sorry, but kind of a bit of history around it.
Explanation. Where do they get their money from? Where do they get their weapons from? The latitude with which they can operate. That's a big question mark. Many would say, let's not go down the road of conspiracy theories, but it still requires an answer.
Yeah, no, it does. Before they swept into Iraq, took over Mosul, etc., about a year and a half ago, their financing came mainly from individuals in the Gulf states. Not governments, but individuals. Qatar, Saudi Arabia in the main. It might have been even people from the royal family, but it was individuals. After they took over the northern part of Iraq, their financing has increased hugely. And they're virtually independent of these kinds of donors. So their main financing comes at the moment from the levying of taxes. So all of the so-called citizens in the Islamic State pay these taxes. So the levying of taxes, oil revenue, because in the territory they control in Iraq, there's lots of oil wells there. They're selling that oil on the open market, often cheaper than everyone else, and so they're able to make lots of money there. Other kinds of trading slash smuggling that they're involved with. Then when they took over those parts of Iraq, a number of banks fell under their control. I suppose I'm being euphemistic. Some would say they robbed the banks, but so they took over a number of banks, and the bank in Mosul, I mean, huge amounts of gold that they took control of. So they are in many ways right now self-sufficient. Their main source of revenue is taxes, which is also an incentive to keep the so-called state going, because if you don't have that, people are not going to be paying. So they're not only self-sufficient, but they're able to dish out money for all kinds of things. Weaponry, I know lots of conspiracy theories about the Toyota 4x4s that, well, if you can pay for it, you can buy it. You know, the money, the financing is coming from these various sources.
Ebrahim, ISIS obviously is not only focused on, in terms of mainstream media here in South Africa, it has a global focus. What's your analysis in terms of how it's played out in the media, especially this perspective where many are arguing that had there been no invasion of Iraq, there would have been no ISIS, and mainstream media locally and globally seem to conveniently ignore this?
I think the first question that we need to ask is who gains from the ISIS conundrum? That's the first question. Second question that we need to consider is that we judge ourselves by our intentions, but we judge others by their actions. So if we examine the actions of ISIS in an objective manner, what do we come up with? Third question would be that all of these events have taken place post 9/11 in the rush for regime change in the Middle East and bringing democracy to countries that didn't enjoy democracy, and the fight against terror. So this has been the breeding ground. Many would say that ISIS is actually a creation of the CIA, like Al-Qaeda was. And the proliferation of not only ISIS, but also Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab poses questions that we need to answer. And you don't have to have a PhD in international relations to fathom out that the timing of these events and the acronym that is being used, an English acronym in a largely Arab-speaking world, that in itself raises questions as to how do other Muslim organizations worldwide become targeted and focused because of the actions taking place by ISIS. So there's a guilt by association, and the question again is who gains from this? Then we need to look at, for example, the ISIS plane that was shot down, and the equipment that the plane was carrying was all US issued. So what is the source of the arms? To wage a war of this magnitude, you need a constant supply of arms. The major arms suppliers in the world are not based in Muslim countries. They are based in the West and the East. So one is the money aspect which has been focused upon. The other is the procurement of the arms. So obviously there is money moving, there's arms moving, and this is not done under the radar, it's done above the radar. And who is allowing this? And why is this being allowed? So it does raise huge question marks.
How would you respond then to somebody who would hear this explanation of yours and say, well, that's a typical Muslim response, blaming everything on the West and latching on to conspiracy theories rather than taking responsibility for a problem child within the house?
Certainly, if there are Muslims, those Muslims who are involved in ISIS, for example, who apparently torched a soldier that was captured, a Jordanian soldier, and put him in a cage and set him alight, obviously there are huge, I think discipline is too weak a word to use for something like that. So Muslims have to look within themselves to say that are these actions representative of what the deen stands for and the conduct of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how far away are these actions from what actual Islam stands for? Because the deen has been hijacked, and this is the crucial question, that things are taking place in the name of the deen, things are taking place, actions are being perpetrated by people claiming themselves to be Muslim, and they are furthest from Muslim actions. And if you look at the actions of our Kabirin, and also the letter that was written to the leadership of ISIS, by the Abu Dhabi group and the International Conference of Scholars that gathered there, I think we need to examine all of the points that they have raised because it makes a lot of sense. So certainly we need to look inside. There has to be introspection as to why there is an appeal, whether it's one person or 20 people. Why is there a level of appeal to ISIS? And the first, from our own past history, if in the apartheid past, if a youngster wanted to join the liberation movements, he or she wanted to fight for justice. They wanted to remove oppression. And this is the kind of gloss and propaganda that has been portrayed as to what ISIS is actually doing. And this would be the appeal that a youngster would want to join ISIS, thinking that he's doing a great thing by joining a liberation movement and a fight for justice.
Okay. Let's go to Cape Town. Joining us also in the panel, we have Maulana Dr. Ashraf Dokrat. He is from the Darussalam Institute in Lodium, currently in Cape Town. Maulana, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Let's try that again. Maulana Ashraf, can you hear me? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I heard that there's quite a bit of rain in Cape Town this evening.
Yes, Maulana, it looks like winter is here.
Well, the aspect of jihad, this is very central and very integral to this whole discussion on ISIS. There are many who believe, call them ISIS sympathizers or those who are inclined to ISIS or whatever you want to call them or label them as, that this is the manifestation of the requirement of the jihad of the time and the only solution to the problems of the ummah at present, after all of this marginalization, suppression, oppression, invasion of Muslim lands, looting of Muslim resources that we've seen, especially in the last decade and a half. The answer is jihad. Can you unpack the concept of jihad for us and how it ties up with ISIS theology?
We have many organizations, many people using the word jihad, sometimes in a very willy-nilly type of way. If we look at the way ISIS has used the word jihad and used, like you say, the concept of jihad and the whole idea of jihad against the infidel and jihad against those people who are even Muslims who they regard as not subscribing to their particular ideology, then we find that concept that is played around by ISIS and used by ISIS is really not in conformity with the Islamic understanding of jihad. Firstly, we understand very well that jihad is not a new concept in Islam. In fact, it is part of the very fundamental beliefs of a Muslim. Has been an active of the Muslim from the beginning of Islam. In recent years, when Muslims had to stand up against colonial forces, it was at times the Sufi tariqas that took the lead in the jihad movements. At times it was people who stood up in Africa, even people like Uthman Dan Fodio, Rahmatullah alayhi, and others stood up to fight the jihads in their lands. Umar Mukhtar, etc., showed us the way that wherever there was oppression, Muslims were prepared to put their lives on line to establish the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the face of this earth, to establish justice on this earth, to remove oppression and to be concerned about the people at large. Now, this is a very, very sensitive type of call that one makes when one makes a call to jihad. And in some ways, what ISIS have very cleverly done is that they have hijacked the call for jihad. And young people, like we've spoken about before, from various socio-economic groupings and various backgrounds, whether it be in the West or the East, find it attractive that they are going to fight for a cause, a higher cause. And they are being used in this way by these deviants to propagate their own type of understanding of the deen. On the other hand, the flip side of it, and I think something that we are often don't pay enough attention to is that one of the victims of the ISIS and one of the victims of Daesh is the true cause of jihad. What happens is that people now say that all resistance in Syria, all resistance anywhere else in the world is fraught with problems. They are all involved with the Islamic State, and therefore we should stop support, we should stop actively involving ourselves in those types of resistance movements. And the first victim then of Daesh, the first victim of the Islamic State, are the Muslims, hundreds of different movements who are sincerely fighting to topple the oppressive regime of Assad, to stop the type of intentions that the West, that the imperial forces have in places like Afghanistan, in Kashmir, etc. And they do a disservice to the Muslim cause, because now when we start speaking about the fact that we should not support this type of movements in this area, it is all fraught with confusion and problems. We really are doing a disservice to the sincere and the good Muslims who have the cause of Islam, and the people who are on the Sirat al-Mustaqim and who are very sincere in what they are doing.
Okay. But the question still remains in the minds of many people, lay people. Well, I know we're going into a bit of a theological discussion, but I think it's necessary that what is the actual jihad then? And what's jihad in terms of being farz ayn, farz kifaya? How does it relate to Muslims in South Africa? There are those who feel that, look, we are one ummah. So if Muslims are being oppressed in Syria and Palestine and Iraq and those parts, and there's a group of people who are claiming to be doing jihad, then we have a responsibility. Some would say a moral responsibility. Others would say more than that, to go and join them. How would you respond to that? How would you explain to such people that this is not an authentic, it's not a genuine jihad as taught by the Deen of Islam? Mullah Ashraf, did you get the question? Mullah Ashraf,
your question, Maulana, your line dropped. We didn't hear your question clearly.
Okay, let me just repeat the question very quickly.
Your question was that how do you respond to people who want to go for jihad and want to go for the genuine jihad?
Yeah, but how do you explain to them what is the genuine jihad from a not so genuine
perspective
jihad?
For these young people, for people who want to go in jihad, and for them to understand that jihad is really a conscious decision that somebody makes with all sincerity to fulfill an important command of the Deen, and with the guidance of God-fearing ulama to fulfill that requirement. I think that is this is what is required, because people are disillusioned by their own circumstances, or they find themselves in a difficult situation where they are in, or they find themselves not belonging, and there isn't an identity by which they can link up to a certain group in their own countries. This is not reason enough to go and fight jihad.
Okay.
The jihad comes with a conscious decision after consultation with people, and then there is certainly no stop to a person who wants to go and serve the Deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and jihad in all its forms has to be promoted and has to be encouraged.
Fakhruddin Owaisi, if I can bring you in here, a little earlier on you spoke about Khilafah when you were making reference to the joint Jummah khutbah. And this word is repeatedly used by ISIS and those who are inclined towards what ISIS promotes and propagates, that there is a Darul Khilafah, there's a so-called Darul Islam, and that a Khilafah is required to solve the problems of the Ummah. And many are actually critical of those who condemn ISIS by saying, look, the problems of the Ummah started when the Khilafah was abolished. and that don't look for too many faults here. It may not be perfect, but at least someone has taken the initiative and started off some sort of a khilafah. It may not be the perfect vehicle, but let's latch onto this vehicle. For too long, we've tried all other options, and those options have not served the ummah well. Can you explain to us, firstly, from a theological perspective, what is meant by khilafah? What is meant by Darul Islam and Darul Harb and Darul Kufr and Darul Tawheed, those terminologies? And then how is ISIS abusing this? And how does the ordinary man then discern and make the distinctions?
State that Islamic theology does not suffer from a poverty of literature on the state and what constitutes an Islamic state. These concepts that we are now, some of us listening to for the first time, Darul Islam, Darul Harb, the Khilafah, the Ahlul Hal wal Aqd, all of these are concepts that are well documented in our books of fiqh. They are well documented in tracts that have been written specifically for and deal with issues of statecraft and deal with issues of governance. So Muslims are not here to reinvent the wheel or to, for the first time, encounter these concepts. However, we must understand and we must realize that these ideas of a Darul Islam on the one hand, a Darul Kufr on the other hand, are concepts that are time-bound in a sense. They speak about a certain time, they speak about a certain context in which these books were written. They speak about a time, for example, when the Mongols were invading Muslim lands. They speak about a time when Muslim lands were being had to defend their borders. So we have a fiqh that is dynamic. We have a fiqh that has developed over the ages. There are new concepts that have been added. For example, the idea of Darul Aman, a place of peace where Muslims can coexist with other people peacefully. This is a concept that was not there, that earlier scholars did not speak about, but is a concept through ijtihad, through deliberation, that scholars have come out and have explained and given Muslims in a different context a way of being and a way of understanding their own situation. So I think these things have to be understood in that context. To isolate certain ideas and of Darul Islam and Darul Tawheed, and then to link these to a certain type of aqidah, to link these to Salafiyat, and a certain type of reading of the Quran, a certain approach to the Quranic text and the text of the Hadith. This is absolutely creating confusion in the minds of many people. And the fact of the matter is that scholars today have deliberated on these issues. Scholars today have understood these concepts, and they, for example, ask very pertinent questions that, look, if you say that you have an Islamic state and you have a Khalifa that has been elected as your leader, and now you claim that that Khalifa is a legitimate Khalifa, who are the Ahlul Hal wal Aqd? Who are the people who bind and who join? Who are the people who are in positions of authority, people of a certain type of learning and intellect, who have elected that Khalifa? This is a precondition to it. What are the conditions of the people who have to be the Ahlul Hal wal Aqd? These are all questions that come to the fore. And unfortunately, if we look at the history of the election of Baghdadi to the Caliphate, we find that all of these concepts are not in place. They are wanting as far as this is concerned.
Okay.
Take, for example, their idea of the wilaya. All of a sudden, a few months ago, they decide that they have a wilaya in Afghanistan. The wilaya of Khurasan now they set up in Afghanistan. On what basis? On whose legitimacy can you just, in another area that from the 80s, Mujahideen have been fighting the Russians, they've been fighting other forces there, and all of a sudden you create a new wilaya and you say this is the wilaya of Khurasan. What is the basis for that in the fiqh? What is the basis for that in Islamic theology?
Okay.
So we see that there are major gaps in the thinking and the reasoning of ISIS. It doesn't matter anymore what they say, and it doesn't matter anymore how they reason. As long as they say it and it's declared, it's regarded as good enough for their adherents.
Okay.
This goes against all Islamic tenets. We know that in an Islamic state, there was always a critical relationship between the scholars on the one hand and the leader on the other hand. We never found, except in some systems, that the scholars and the leader were the same person, that the leaders and the scholars decided things together. There was always a critical relationship between them. In fact, the scholars remained far from the seats of governance and of state.
Okay.
Here you find that these two concepts are merged into one person, into one seat, and they make the declaration. Whatever declaration they make, whatever things they say, becomes the religious edict and the religious verdict as well. And this goes against the fundamental tenet of Islamic governance and Islamic rule.
Okay, Maulana, Jazakumullah for that. Just before we go for the break, Maulana Fakhruddin Owaisi, can you hear me? I'm just trying to ascertain if Maulana Fakhruddin is with us still there, and if you can hear me in the Cape Town studio. All right, let's go for a break. We'll try and iron out some of those technical issues, and when we come back, we continue the discussion, inshallah.
أوشك اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Welcome back. We are talking about ISIS this evening. We have two guests in studio with us here in Sunning Hill, Johannesburg, named Jeenah from AMAC and Brother Ebrahim Patel, who is one of the spokespersons on behalf of those organizations that took out the media statement yesterday. It's a joint Muslim civil society initiative. In Cape Town, we have the two Maulanas, Maulana Ashraf Dokrat and Maulana Fakhruddin Owaisi. Maulana Ashraf Dokrat is from the Dar es Salaam Institute in Lodium, and Maulana Fakhruddin Owaisi is from the Sunni Ulama Council. We had a bit of a technical problem. I think Maulana Fakhruddin couldn't hear me. I want that last question before the break was actually posed to him. Let me try now and then make sure Maulana can hear me. Maulana Fakhruddin, can you hear me loud and clear? Okay, there still seems to be a problem. We'll come back to Maulana Fakhruddin in a short while. Coming back here, Naeem, the question that we kind of alluded to before we went to the more theological aspects of it, but requires a bit of detail. Why does ISIS have appeal? What resonates in terms of what ISIS has to say?
I think there's two reasons. One is a political reason and one is a theological reason, and that's why we also have to focus on those theological aspects. The political reason is quite simple. I mean, there's the kinds of things that Ebrahim spoke about earlier on. Muslims have a very keen sense now, especially with information and communication technologies that we have, a keen sense of the occupations, the imperialism, the neo-colonial projects in the Muslim world. The fact that Western powers have been, particularly in the United States, supporting dictators in the Muslim world that have been worse than dictators in the Western world in many instances. I mean, most recently, for the first time, the Arab world has had democratic elections. In Egypt, the biggest Arab country, those were reversed by a military coup, and it got recognition and acceptance from the United States. So all of these things put together, and then the broader context of a world in which you have a single superpower that supports some of the worst people on this planet, rulers and other organizations, armed organizations in South America, etc. These factors put together means that people who are conscious about the state of the world, people who are conscious about the state of human beings, feel affected. And Muslims by their nature should be. So there are many Muslims who feel upset by the fact that there's poverty, feel upset that there's occupation, feel upset that there's oppression and exploitation and dictatorship in various parts of the world. And here you have an organization that seems to be not only speaking against this, but actually seems to be winning. Now, my own argument is that really ISIS is not fighting Israel, ISIS is not fighting the United States, not fighting Britain, but at least in their rhetoric, they seem to be doing that, and they're providing Muslims with a sense of confidence that we are the best, we will defeat everyone, etc. So the one is that kind of political thing. The other is the theological aspect, and so they have very, as Maulana Ashraf said, very skillfully used the concepts of Khilafah, of Darul Islam, all of those things, jihad, etc., in order to make a case. And for many people, that discourse has become one that has virtually become fard. So the notion that you have to now make hijrah and go and live in the dawla, as it is called, those who feel attracted to it, from a theological perspective, feel attracted because they feel it's an obligation that they have to do this hijrah and they have to move. I think that really to counter that and to address that or to engage with that, yes, we need to engage with those concepts. But also we have to understand that, and I think that one of the positive things about ISIS, and I say that with caution, Ebrahim, before he lashes out at me. One of the positive things about ISIS is that it's forcing us to rethink these concepts that many of us took for granted. The fact is that these ideas about Darul Harb, Darul Islam, etc., are not from the Quran and the Sunnah. They came about, as Maulana Ashraf said, in particular periods of our history when they might have been necessary. They no longer are necessary, and they no longer even make sense in a world where you don't have a central Muslim entity. So even Darul Aman is the way that a central Muslim entity relates to another nation with which it is at peace or has a treaty. In today's terms, we talk about citizenship. You and I are citizens in this country. There's no sense that we have a treaty with some people. We don't have a treaty, we're citizens. We have an ID document, we have a passport. That gives us a completely different perspective, a completely different status. If we have to go by those concepts of Darul Islam, etc., then you might say that we should make hijrah. And it's a silly argument to get into. Should we make hijrah, should we not make? How are you going to argue it? By looking at books from 1200 years, from 800 years ago, who didn't know what citizenship meant, didn't address the context that we have. So I think that this is the challenge that ulama need to take up, is how do we rethink the fiqh in a way that groups like ISIS cannot then hijack that fiqh, because that fiqh is no longer hijackable because it's no longer relevant.
A quick question. One of the images, if I can call it that, that's been portrayed by those who have gone across is that everything's hunky-dory, very rosy, it's peace, it's tranquil, everything runs according to Sharia law, almost like it's the time of the Sahaba in this particular era that's playing out. Factually, how factual is that?
There is a factual basis to it, and from two perspectives. One is that ISIS has created a political entity. There are parts of ISIS in Raqqa, for example, where there isn't fighting taking place on an ongoing basis. Yes, people's freedoms are curtailed. Yes, they're forced to do certain things and forced not to do certain things, etc. But there isn't fighting taking place. So from that perspective, it seems peaceful. The other perspective from which it seems factual is that facts also based on perspective and perception. And so for people who go there and expecting something, they find it. Now you and I might not see that, we might see it a bit differently. But I read an article yesterday about one of these ISIS fighters narrating to a Western, not Western, an Arab journalist, but a secular journalist, about the great life he has. He's a fighter, but for his honeymoon, the Dawla sent him to Raqqa. And he talks about his walk with his new wife, holding hands alongside the river. And yeah, it sounds like Jannah, or it sounds like in Mpumalanga. One or the other, because I'm not too sure what Jannah sounds like. But that's a matter of perception. The reality might be quite different. For people that live in Raqqa that are not fighters, that are not getting money to go on honeymoon, what does that mean? The fact that they're not able to freely leave their homes and move about, etc. So on the one hand, there's this sense among people who are attracted because they also find the fulfillment of their expectation there. Right? We often say about those people who left South Africa on the chicken run My wife's from Australia. And many South Africans that my in-laws speak about meeting in Australia, they have nothing but evil to say about this country. I mean, my in-laws were warned before I got married that my wife will be robbed and worse within the first 2 weeks she gets here, because they have to justify to themselves how lovely that place is and how bad this place is. And so it's the same kind of thing here as well.
I think we also need to look at the concept of mass delusion, because we are increasingly living in a world we do not understand, and the first casualty of war is always truth. So there appears to be a type of mass delusion taking place, and this has taken place in other times if we look at history. One of the other appeals of ISIS could be that they appear to be rectifying the wrongs of Muslim society, because Muslims have become the largest displaced people in the world today, the largest number of refugees. Previously, very solid societies in Libya, Syria, these communities and these countries have been bombed into the Middle Ages by a Western coalition. So these refugees who once led very safe, normal lives are crying out for help. And the appeal could be that let us join a just struggle to restore their rights, and this becomes their jihad.
Two quick questions from a media perspective. The first is, how is it that they're so effective on social media? Sometimes people grapple, you know, you think of Raqqa and you think of Syria, Iraq, and bombs falling all over the show, and here you get guys who are even startling and surprising social media specialists in terms of how effective they are on social media.
Social media has no boundaries, so that's the first issue. Second is mass communication has taken over, and young people today have access to mass communication. And you don't know if the person on the other side, and there was an article in the papers a few days ago, where a person that was liaising with a so-called fighter from ISIS was not actually a fighter from ISIS, was somebody else totally. So it's very easy to hide your identity, because this is a very different form of communication. And the appeal young people would have is an anonymous type of communication which nobody knows about. So it's a make-believe world, in the sense that you create your own delusion, and that's the most dangerous aspect, when you create your own delusion. When people lie with sincerity, that's the first sign of great hypocrisy, and we should guard against that.
Let me make a point about the social media as well. I mean, you're right. The social, not only the social media, but also the other media. Their magazine, their websites, etc., are really, I mean, that video that many of us didn't even want to watch of the Jordanian pilot being burned, really well done, well put together, well produced stuff. But let me just note, when South Africans, for example, but others as well, when they arrive on the border with Syria, men and women get separated. Men that are under 40 get sent for military training. For 3 months that they are in training, neither they, if they're with a wife, for example, neither of them have any telecommunications access. Forget internet and social media, not even telephone access. Right? So people from South Africa have gone, for those 3 months they'll not be able to contact their families. Once they then get sent, if they're fighters, they would have limited access. If they're living in Raqqa or wherever, they don't have internet access in their homes. They have to go to internet cafes. It's very public, etc. So the social media presence, or the media presence that we're seeing of ISIS on the internet, is given in that way to certain small groups of people that are really savvy with these skills, that are able to put out the best images of whatever they want to put out. The ordinary so-called citizens of this Islamic State don't get that same access, and I think that we need to note.
Let's try Maulana Fakhruddin Owaisi once again. I really want to get his comment on some aspects. Maulana, can you hear me now, hopefully? Okay.
Yes, I can
Maulana,
hear you.
the issue of takfir, I want you to elaborate on this. When questions are put to ISIS people that, why are you killing Muslims? They say, no, we don't kill Muslims. We don't consider these people to be Muslims. Now, we cannot go to the other extreme and say there is absolutely no concept of takfir in our deen. There is the concept of an apostate, of a person turning his back on his deen. But how is this all playing out with ISIS? And how are they abusing this, or, according to them, using it correctly?
No, indeed, there's no doubt that one of the concepts that ISIS are abusing is the concept of takfir. Takfir, basically, for the ordinary viewer out there, takfir means to call a Muslim a kafir, to call him a disbeliever, take him out of the fold of Islam. And obviously, you know, what follows that is then he is considered a murtad, which means that you can actually kill him, or, you know, his blood is halal and so on. So this is a very serious concept, and it's one of the things that you have to be extremely cautious about. Anybody who says La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, believes in the Quran, believes in the 5 pillars of Islam, prays to our Qibla, to call such a person a kafir, it's a very, very serious matter. You are putting yourself in the seat, you know, basically in the position of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really it's very dangerous. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Man qala li akhihi ya kafir faqad ba'a bi ahaduhuma. Whoever calls another Muslim a kafir, then if that person is not really a kafir, you become a kafir. And there is an incident where Sayyidina Usama bin Zayd radiallahu anhu was in a battle, in a valid jihad. He was fighting one of the enemies of Islam, and this man kept on attacking him, and Usama, you know, fought him back, and then Usama radiallahu anhu kind of, you know, got on top of him and was about to kill him. And this is in battle, right? They are both fighting each other. Where Usama was about to kill him, the man said, La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. You know, he just repeated these words. He didn't say, I understand them, I understand all the rules of Islam, I understand all the principles. He just repeated the words, La ilaha illallah. But Usama killed him anyways. So somebody, you know, somebody reported this to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam called Usama and said to him, Oh Usama, did you kill him after he said, La ilaha illallah? So Usama said, Ya Rasulullah, he said it to save his life. It was obvious. So sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said to him, Oh Usama, did you kill him after he said, La ilaha illallah? He said, Ya Rasulullah, like a minute ago he was about to kill me, but when I was about to kill him, he said it to save his life. Again, the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam said, Usama, did you kill him after he said, La ilaha illallah? Usama then kept quiet. He became ashamed, you know, and he became embarrassed. He kept quiet, and in one narration he says, I said for the last time, Ya Rasulullah, but, you know, hesitantly, he said it to save his life, Ya Rasulullah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said at that moment, Halla shaqaqta an qalbih. Oh Usama, did you open up the heart of this man to see what was his intention when he said that? So in this case, you have a person which it's obviously, you know, he's saying it to save his life. He doesn't know Islam. He is a kafir. He grew up as a kafir. He came to fight Islam in the battle. He is on the side of the kuffar. When he's about to be killed by the opponent, he says it. Yet the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam gives him the benefit of the doubt and scolds one of his own closest Sahaba, saying, did you open the heart of the man to see what his niyyah is? What we see with ISIS is that everybody who they are fighting right now are people of La ilaha illallah. They are either fighting Sunnis or Shias or the Kurdish people. All of them are Muslims. All of them are people who say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasul. All of them perform Salah. All of them fast in Ramadan. All of them make Hajj to Makkah. All of them, you know, the flag, you find both of them are two parties, both of them are shouting Allahu Akbar. So this mass takfir of everybody, right, you know, is one of the biggest problems of ISIS, and it's not a new problem. It's been there from the time of the Khawarij. We know that during the time of the Sahaba themselves, a group came out called the Khawarij, and they said anyone who doesn't join our group is a kafir. This was in the time of the Sahaba, and they even killed many Sahaba, including Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu.
Okay,
and their idea was, whoever doesn't agree with us is a kafir.
I'm going to rush you a little bit there because I want you to
this is the same mentality we see here, and we have to be very, very careful of that.
Yeah, I'm just going to rush you a bit, Maulana, because I want you to cover one or two other aspects. We're running out of time. The issue of sex slaves. This comes under great scrutiny from mainstream media, and ISIS seems to be providing religious text from their perspective, theological arguments, justifying that. What's your thought?
One of the most horrible things that they are doing is kidnapping, you know, women of their opponents, many a time simply because they belong to a different mazhab or a different religion, and taking these ladies as sex slaves, basically taking them as slaves and then thinking it's okay to have sex with them. which is basically rape. And they try to justify it by using examples from the time of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. We have to understand that in the time of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, there was no system of prisoners of war and prisons and so on. In a battle, when the men are all killed, the women have nowhere to go. So the system of the world at that time was that these women were taken by the soldiers, and they were kind of like wives with them. If she gives birth to some child, he becomes your son and so on. So this system was there in those days, and not only with Muslims, throughout the world at that time, to protect the women and the family system. Otherwise, a woman would become a prostitute, or she would have nowhere to go. So this was the system in those days. We're talking about 1,400 years ago, to protect the women. Today, the same system is being used to rape women. We don't have this system anymore. Slavery has been abolished, alhamdulillah, and may it never come back. And Islam all the time promoted the abolition of slavery. There are many ayat of the Quran and many ahadith where the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions, Allah and His Prophet mention, that amongst the greatest actions a man can do to please Allah is to free a slave. So what's Islam trying to say here? It's trying to say that the more we free slaves, the more Allah is pleased. In other words, if we can have a society where there are no slaves at all, then that is a society Allah is happy with.
Okay.
So when slavery was prohibited and abolished from this world, it is something that pleases Allah. But these people want to now revive that under the wrong idea that it's a part of the deen and so on. And remember, the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith that the worst of people in the eyes of Allah is a man that sells other men.
Okay.
So what about a woman and who she's been taken from her family and she's being raped and so on. So without a doubt, this is an abomination and a crime against humanity. And more than that, it's a crime against Islam, that the name of Islam is being used for these type of actions.
Okay. One more quick question for you, Maulana Fakhruddin Owaisi. The issue of the Medina Charter, I see this is coming up in different articles. People feel there is great relevance and we need to look at the Medina Charter in terms of this whole ISIS situation. What are your thoughts?
Exactly. Our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I just want to make a very important point here, that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was never after power. He didn't want to become a ruler or a president or rule over people. He had no intention like that. The kuffar of Makkah presented to him the option of becoming the chief of Makkah. He refused. He went to Medina, not because he wanted to, but because he was forced to leave Makkah. Even when he went to Medina, he had no intention of ruling over those people. He went there as a prophet, but because most of the people in Medina were Muslims, he became a ruler. But what is the first thing he did after he became a ruler? He made, an agreement with the non-Muslims in Medina, the Jews and the non-Muslims in Medina, what we call the Medina Charter, in which one of the things he said in the Medina Charter, the Jews will have full right to follow their religion and no Muslim will be allowed to harass them in their religion. The Jews will maintain their places of worship and they can pray as they want in their places of worship, and no Muslim will have the right to interfere with their places of worship. The Jews will live in their own areas and do business where they want to, and a Muslim will not have the right to abuse them or harass them. Also, that Muslims and Jews and everybody else will be equal in the sight of the law. So, he accommodated these people. He gave them all the rights. Why did he do that? It's not only because respecting the religions of other people, also because he realized that these people are citizens of Medina. They have been living in Medina for hundreds of years. So how can I, who come from outside of Medina, now come and chase these people away or hurt these people who are the inhabitants of this land? So we have to, the rule in Islam is coexistence, that we live with everybody, with all the people of our land together. And the same thing applies in South Africa. We have no reason, we have no goal in going over anywhere else. Allah has put us here in this land. Alhamdulillah, we are keeping the torch of Islam alive and lighted in the southernmost tip of Africa. Allah has put us on this frontier where our jihad is to help the poor and needy in this land. Our jihad is to feed the hungry people in this land. Our jihad is to take Islam to the masses of this country who are looking for spirituality. Our jihad is to help our country from whose air we breathe and on whose land we walk. Right. We have no interest in Iraq or Syria. Those are not our countries. We have nothing to do there. The politics there is very dirty, and these are people killing each other in the name of religion and politics. And I conclude with a statement the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made, to a man who came to him and said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to go for jihad. And this was a valid jihad. So the Nabi ﷺ said to him, do you have parents? He said, yes. Are they old? He said, yes. He said, is there anybody who can take care of them? Who takes care of them? The young man said, I'm the one that takes care of them. The Nabi ﷺ said, then stay at home and take care of them. فَفِيهِمَا فَجَاهِدْ. Your jihad is to serve them.
Okay.
So in the same light, we say our jihad in this country is to maintain the deen and Islam that our forefathers worked very hard to build here. In Cape Town, 300 years, our forefathers were slaves. They were oppressed, but they kept the deen alive in this land.
Right.
Why should we turn our back to all of that and go to some God-forsaken place where we don't know why these people are killing each other? As the Nabi ﷺ said, the killer doesn't know why he's killing, and the people who are getting killed have no idea why they are getting killed. And in another hadith, both the killer and the killed are in hellfire because they both wanted to kill each other.
Okay,
so we
we
are better off in a position here where Allah has placed us. And we have a lot of work to do in this country.
Okay. All right, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes to conclude. I just want to touch on 1 or 2 last concluding issues with yourself, Ebrahim, and then Naeem. The issue of contradictory evidence. Many people say, but you hear good things, you hear bad things. Is it not perhaps that mainstream media are trying to demonize them because they are the modern-day David taking on the Goliath? How do you respond to that?
With a lot of skepticism. Simply because you will judge people precisely on their actions. And how do the actions fit into the conduct of the actions of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Khulafa Rashidin? Are these actions consistent with the ideals and values and principles of Islam? Yes or no? So just pure reason and sound logic, like Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, reason and sound logic is the root of my religion. So we just need to apply reason, we just need to apply sound logic and use that value, use that yardstick to judge anything, firstly. Secondly...
Before you continue the second point, there are those who say that, I get your point, but on what basis do you apply? They would say, there are those who believe that even that video of them slaughtering and burning, even that is a fabrication of mainstream media to profile them negatively.
Well, in the absence of first-hand reports, in the absence of a person standing on the battlefield or standing in the middle of area controlled by ISIS, you will not have an accurate report. So you will have to be very circumspect with the reports that you are getting and rely on second and third-hand reports. And that's why I said earlier that the first casualty of war is always truth. So how does one ascertain what is happening? Because on what basis do those that say that this is the true jihad of the time, what's their dalail? What is their basis for formulating a decision to say that this is the jihad that I must join?
Well, if I could just interrupt you, if you don't mind, Ebrahim. Our approach at Afro Middle East Center is that we analyze ISIS on the basis of what they say about themselves.
Okay.
Rather than on the basis of
from their own sources.
Because firstly, the other media actually don't have access, right? From their own sources, the videos of people's necks getting cut with a knife is from their own sources. The argumentation about why it's okay to take sex slaves is from their own sources. The burning of the pilot is from their own source. All of these is from their own sources because not only do they do it, but they gloat about it and they're proud about it. Right. So let's judge them on the basis of what they claim for themselves. Yeah.
One more question to Ebrahim. The issue of Muslim media and Muslim journalists. There is an accusation floating at the moment that some Muslim journalists are conducting themselves somewhat recklessly in how they're reporting on this. They're seeing it as a career opportunity. It's a good time as a Muslim journalist to make your name for yourself by reporting on ISIS recruitment in your own country and the related stories.
I think one has to be transparent about what is happening. At the same time, one should have a balance about not blowing something out of proportion and not to be sensationalist just for the sake of sensationalism. So yes, we need to report what is happening in our own communities because it helps us to honestly and critically examine the thought processes, the kind of tarbiyah that is being created in our communities, because if we do not do introspection, we will get nowhere. Also, in terms of our community participation in various forums, I think we need to agree on the principle that we will agree to disagree in an agreeable manner, despite what the differing opinions are. Thirdly, Muslim media has a role to play. Equally, national media also has a role to play, And if we stay aloof from national media, we will not be able to put our point of view across.
Okay.
If we say that we okay, Jack, we know what's happening, we do not need to interact with the other, then that I think is a very dangerous stance.
All right. Last question to you, Naeem. A few months ago, the two of us were together here with the Iraqi ambassador, and it was a very robust discussion. He may be coming back now and say, I told you guys, it's more than 1 or 2 C, it's a few families already. Should we concede that it's a bigger problem than what the Muslim community initially thought? And going forward now, what should be the approach of Muslim community? You've got parents whose hearts have been broken. You've got parents who are worried. It mustn't be my child pretending to do homework. He's interacting with somebody via social media. What's your advice in conclusion?
Firstly, I don't accept the I told you so argument, because my argument in that debate was that show us the evidence and we'll accept your version. You can't say that there are lots of Muslims going to join ISIS if you can give me 2 names of people who didn't join ISIS. Secondly, yes, we do need to concede. I think certainly for me, I should say that I need to concede that what we thought a few months ago was the extent of the attraction of ISIS in South Africa, that it's more than that. And so we need to concede that and examine within our community why that is the case. For parents, and I've spoken to some of the parents of people who have gone, very distressing stories, very painful for them, but also for those who are listening to their stories about their children or sisters or brothers or whatever the case is. I think that certainly within the Muslim community we need to be vigilant, as we always do. We need to, as we try to be vigilant about our children not taking drugs, looking for signs of those kinds. Similarly, I think that there are signs for people who get attracted to a group like ISIS. When the unhappiness moves into anger, when the anger moves to a level where they believe that it can't be satisfied, that it has to find an outlet, when they have what seems to be secret conversations on the internet with people that you don't know who they are, especially if they're minors. Firstly, there's the pedophilia possibility, which is a big problem, but this is the other one, right? That I think that as our communities are spreading in many ways geographically, that we still have to maintain a sense of community, so that we look after our children all together. All of these signs that we need, when people start getting too macho about or too depressed about what's happening in the world. These are things that we should be willing to sit down with our children, talk through them, try to find answers, and answers are not always to be found, but if children find that their parents are engaging with them on these big issues, not just about themselves and their studies, but big issues of the world, I think that we can then move forward together without ceding our children to extremist groups.
Naeem, Jeenah, Ebrahim, Patel, Maulana Fakhruddin Owaisi, and Maulana Ashraf Dokra, Jazakumullah to all of you, and it was really appreciated that you took out your time this evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And to the viewers out there, I'm really sorry. I was hoping that we would have had some time to take a few calls, but we had a lot of ground to cover. I know we haven't really gone into the depths of it. We've touched on a bit of detail in each one of the key issues that we've managed to raise, but hopefully this will be the first of a few discussions to come on the topic of ISIS. Until the next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
فاستنهضي همما فالمسجد الأقصى ما زال يدعونا ندي على الفتية الأحرار في زمن أضحى به الحق بالخذلان مدفونا فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته وهل لغير القوي الناس يصغونا رباه هيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا فأنت من بالتقى والدين يهدينا أدعوك يا أمتي فاستنهضي همما فالمسجد الأقصى ما زال يدعونا ندي على الفتية الأحرار في زمن